Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our third session in our High Touch, High Tech series. Today's topic is Leadership in STEM, paving the way for this generation and the next. My name is Megan Stovall-McKnight, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation. I am so pleased to welcome you back for another great conversation. As part of the University Health Network, the Princess Margaret is a truly global organization that has so many brilliant and accomplished leaders, many of whom are women. Our organization recognizes and celebrates the achievement of women to the fields of science and medicine, not only on International Women's Day, but every day of the year. This past Monday was International Women's Day, and this year's theme was Choose to Challenge, highlighting the importance of raising your hand, speaking up, and calling out gender bias and inequality. Diversity is a strength of any society, but our collective potential will only be realized when we have a safe, inclusive environment where our differences are truly celebrated and not just accepted. We can all choose to seek out and celebrate the achievements of women, which is what we're here to do today. In last month's webinar, we spoke to Dr. Gelare-Zadeh, neurosurgical oncologist and senior scientist at the Princess Margaret. In this session, she shared her story and how she is breaking barriers in the field of neuro-oncology. And now today, we are bringing together a panel of exceptional women from across the Princess Margaret to discuss leadership in STEM, mentorship of women, and highlighting the important research being done in their respective fields. Now, before I welcome our panelists, a reminder that we will have time for audience question and answer towards the end of the program, and we would love to hear from you. You can submit questions through our session using Slido. The link to submit questions can be found in the YouTube description below the screen. Today, I am delighted to speak with this panel of accomplished women who bring diverse experiences from across the Princess Margaret. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. Now, let's begin with some brief introductions. Can you introduce yourself and tell us about the role that you play in the Princess Margaret ecosystem and how long you've been here? I'm going to begin with Dr. Leslie Moody, Clinical Director for the Princess Margaret Cancer Program.
Thank you so much, Megan, and really thank you very much to be invited for the panel. As mentioned, I'm the clinical director at Princess Margaret Cancer Center. I've been here for about 18 or 19 months now, and very happy to be back in clinical operations. So previous to this role, I've worked at the system level as the Director of Person-Centered Care, and prior to that, at a much smaller cancer center for the development, building, and opening of it. So I'm delighted to be back in operations. My role is directly to oversee all of the solid tumor ambulatory areas, as well as a few of the inpatient units, and serve as a member on the cancer executive for the oversight for all of the cancer center and the cancer program. We do actually go much more broadly than the cancer center itself, and we serve patients across, well, the globe, the province, but really my role is to make sure that the cancer experience is seamless across the other sites as well. So my background is in science, in biochemistry. I have an MBA in health services management and a PhD from U of T in health policy. So sort of the three different levels to serve in this role, both the bench, the business, and then the policy aspect and government relations. So I'm very delighted to be here today, and thank you very much for the invite, Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Leslie. I'm now going to hand it over to Annette Julius, who is Director of Professional Practice for the Princess Margaret Cancer Program.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for this incredible opportunity. So I'm the Director of Professional Practice for Nursing and Health Professions in the Oncology Program. And really my role is to ensure that appropriate resources and tools are provided for the clinicians under my portfolio to be able to provide that best patient care. I'm also the delegate to the Chief Nurse Executive at UHN, Dr. Joy Richards, for the Oncology Program here at Princess Margaret. A little bit about me: I have been at Princess Margaret for about 9 years, and I've played various roles, or I should say, I've taken on various roles as an advanced practice nurse educator with the medical radiation, palliative, teams, and then senior professional practice leader for a few years over the cancer program, and now the director of professional practice. So years of very much practice-focused work, and I'm an oncology nurse background.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Annette. Next up is Dr. Fifi Liu, who is chief of the radiation medicine program at Princess Margaret Cancer Center.
Thank you so much, Megan, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. So as Megan said, my name is Dr. Fifi Liu. I'm the chief of the radiation medicine program, head of the Department of Radiation Oncology here at the Princess Margaret. I've been in this role since 2012. I'm also the chair of the University of Toronto Department of Radiation Oncology, also since 2012. And so in this role, I have the privilege of delivering more than 11,000 courses of radiation therapy every single year. And the Princess Margaret Radiation Medicine Program is one of the world's largest single-site facility. I'm privileged to lead a team of about 350 individuals who are dedicated to driving innovation and research, as well as training and educating the next generation of radiation medicine professionals. And I do believe that I have been at the Princess Margaret for probably the longest of anyone on this panel. I started actually training at the old Princess Margaret on 500 Sherbourne in 1983 at the age of 5. And I have been at the Princess Margaret. I was down in Stanford University for 1 year and have been back here as a staff radiation oncologist since 1988, and have been here and thrilled to be here for all those years and looking after our patients. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fifi. Next up is Dr. Anastasia Tikanova, who's a scientist at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be here today. So I probably the newest person here. I started my labs in August, and it's a new group, and I'm basically investigating how cells are communicating with each other and how it produces the normal mechanisms in the body, and as well as diseases. So I'm really excited to be here today, and I look forward to this exciting hour.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Catherine O'Brien, scientist at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center and general surgeon at University Health Network.
Thank you very much, Megan. I am truly honored to be here today, and I think it's a great program that you're having to focus on women. I'm a surgical oncologist at the University Health Network, and I started in 2009. I'm also a scientist at the Princess Margaret and the chair of the stem cell group. And in that role, I'm very proud to say that we have actually last year hired 3 women principal investigators to the stem cell group. One of which was Anastasia Tikanova, and we're really honored to have really great quality women joining our group, and I think it's something that I'm definitely most proud of. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you all for sharing with us what you do and the many hats that you wear at Princess Margaret, UHN, and beyond. We'd like to hear a little bit from each of you about your professional and personal journeys, and really what inspired you to get into research in healthcare. So Lesley, we'll start with you again.
Well, thank you very much for that question. What inspired me? I think actually a lot of my life has been stumbling into things, to be honest. I was told very early on academically to show up early, learn everything, and stay late. And with that, you will be asked to do many things in your life. And it will take you in different directions. And I think that's sort of how I ended up here. I think probably like many of us, we have personal experience with cancer that sort of in the back of our minds drives our desire to give up a lot of our lives to our jobs and our research. But I think for me, I stumbled on this path as I was not going to cut it as a bench researcher. Anybody that knows me personally knows that I am an extremely social person that needs to get out there and fix things and do things. And when I was in biochemistry in the lab, I was not myself. I think I was very good at pipetting. I assure you, Anastasia, I'd probably be very good in your lab, but it was certainly not for me. So I took to traveling actually, and opened up a few doors internationally, and started to work on coming back home to do my MBA. In that, I had the opportunity to work in a cancer center, and that's what started it all. I was actually brought in for the build of the cancer center, and I learned sort of every nook and cranny of how the information system worked, how the clinical pieces work. Not being a clinical background, I've always relied on colleagues like Annette and Fifi to guide me in terms of the clinical aspects. And that's kind of rare in some of the clinical director roles to not be a clinician. So I sort of stumbled into cancer, and then I loved it. I loved operations. With that, I was sort of missing the research aspect of things. So I went back to do my PhD and research in health services research. And that's how I stumbled upon the whole aspect of patient-reported outcomes and patient-reported experience measures, and it kind of springboarded me into being a niche area at the time. Before it was really popular, kind of in this decade, been working on this since the early 2000s. And so was able to be there at the coalface with many of the pioneers in that space and learn from them. Obviously, I'm a very junior researcher, so their mentorship and guidance has been incredible to me along my journey. So a little bit of personal experience and a lot of serendipitous opportunities that came my way.
Brilliant. I'm gonna hand it over to Fifi, who started at the Cancer Center when she was 5.
Thank you.
Maybe you can tell us what inspired you to get into healthcare and research.
Right. Okay. So my story, I'm afraid, has very little poignancy to it. It's really I think all of us, in this room virtually, have had very influential people in their lives. And mine was my mother, who's now 96 years old and is still alive. And so she was very progressive for her era, where she realized that women's value, if you will, declined with age because of loss and decline in beauty. But she decided that physicians, on the other hand, they actually increased in value with age, because of course everybody wants to come to an experienced and and elderly and wise physician. So when I was about 6 years old, she basically said, "Fifi, you're going to become a physician." I said, "Okay, Mom." And then she kind of planted the rest of my life. And so I ended up skipping many grades and in fact graduated from medical school here in Toronto at the age of 22. And then so that was kind of how I started. So it was my Asian mother. And then I also have an older brother, Peter, who is now the director of the Ottawa Heart Research Institute. He's a cardiologist, a researcher. And so he got into medical school about 2 years before I did. And so we have this friendly sibling rivalry. And so I figured if he could do it, I could do it even better. And so that was how I ended up in medicine. In terms of research, that was like, as Leslie said, I kind of stumbled into it. I went down to Stanford, as I mentioned, to do a clinical fellowship, but then I got involved in laboratory research, and I kind of thought, wow, this is really interesting, where you can actually design things in your head and design these experiments, execute them, and get some answers, albeit limited in terms of cell lines and mouse studies. And so when I came back here at the Princess Margaret in 1988, I had said to my boss at the time, Professor Bill Duncan, that I'd like to do some lab work. He said, "Well, that's very good, Fifi, but here's your full 5-day clinical schedule and do your lab research on the weekends and the evenings." But I was really fortunate that I had wonderful mentors who were all men at that time. Many of them have all retired, basically, people like Dick Hill and Gord Whitmore and Vic Ling, and they took me under their wings and mentored me in everything from manuscript writing to grant writing, and I've been really, really fortunate and have loved it ever since.
Amazing. It's interesting how some of the lines are straight lines and some of them are curved lines, but all of them are very interesting stories on their own. Catherine, why don't I hand it over to you? What inspired you to get into research in healthcare?
Right. Well, I did general surgery at the University of Western Ontario. And during that residency, you could do a master's, and you could do a master's in basic science. And that's what I chose to do. And I really loved it. And I loved the process of the research, but I knew that that area wasn't for me. So they wanted me to do a PhD there. And I said, no, I don't want it. I want to go on and do a fellowship. So I came to Toronto and did a surgical oncology fellowship. And as a part of the second year, you could do research. And I kind of asked around, and people said, go with, try working with John Dick, and that worked out. And then I realized I really loved it. I loved the environment as much as I liked research at Western. Joining the Princess Margaret and having that environment of research was just incredible. And then it was clear to me I wanted to do a PhD. So I did a lot of moonlighting at different hospitals, and I would work weekends, and then 9 to 5 during the work week, I would do research for about 4 years. And so I really ran 2 jobs because I just loved it. And I got a lot of good advice from senior surgeons, actually older surgeons, saying, oh, I think that's smart you're doing that, because after like 20 years, the surgery kind of gets a little bit rote, and to have something else that you're doing is a good idea. And I just love the research, and I actually love the clinic as well. I love the combination of both, and having in research, you have very long-term goals and things happen very slowly. So you get results, but it's over months and over years that things take shape, projects take shape. Whereas in the clinic, in the context of surgery, it's actually very direct, and the results are actually very quick, and you're seeing the results. So I really like the combination of the two, and I think it definitely has kept me very occupied and very satisfied intellectually.
Awesome. I can definitely see how all of that is keeping you occupied. That's amazing. Annette, what inspired you to pursue nursing?
Yeah, that's I'd reflected on that. It's interesting because I think that I'm not sure why I actually chose nursing, other than to say I've always had an interest in science and also service, and definitely love people, just people in general. With my reflection, I thought it would be important to maybe highlight an example of a story that inspired me to just keep on going, especially over the last year. So when I started my career, I worked with individuals who were diagnosed with sarcoma, osteosarcoma, bone cancer. And so the patient population were usually between the ages of 16, 17 at that time in my care, up to about 40. And early on in my career, within my first year of being a brand new nurse, I worked with a person. It was my third night shift with this individual, 22-year-old, and advanced disease. And during my safety rounds at night, he was awake and he said, I want to ask you a question. I said, what is it? He said, when I die, will you come to my funeral? I paused. I said, you're silly, go to sleep. But I remember this is something that never left me, because beyond the education, beyond the clinical, advances and experiences as a clinician, as a nurse, I realized I must have done something to impact an individual in a positive way in their difficult journey for them to invite me. And, that is one of many stories of incredible encounters. And I think as a person and as a clinician, this is what inspires me to continue in my journey, and to really advocate for that intelligent, competent care, but also compassionate care.
That is beautiful, Annette. Thank you for sharing that incredible story with us. I'm going to just pass it over to you, Anastasia. You, as you mentioned earlier, you're the most recent addition to the Princess Margaret family here, having joined us just last August, I believe, from New York. So what inspired you to get into research, and why did you choose the Princess Margaret?
So I grew up in Russia in a family of 2 airplane engineers. And so my dad is still upset that I didn't choose to be a pilot for the fighter jet. And but I told him I can find another avenue. And I came as an exchange student to the States, did my undergrad, and then realized I always loved biology. I actually remember my first class in biology, which was in fifth grade in Russia, where it was really focused on evolution and on Darwin. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is so fascinating. And in college, I started doing the summer research for the students and realized that I just loved being in the lab. So instead of, many times, instead of socializing and going to parties, I actually wanted to go and do something that would make sense. And the result would of course, it doesn't always work out this way, but in the lab, you are in controlled environment. And then I did 2 years at National Institute of Health as a postdoc before going for my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. And at NIH, I had a very good mentor who was a woman, and she took me without me having any real research experience. And for 2 years, whenever something didn't work, she would tell me, oh, Anastasia, just order new reagents. It's not you, it's the reagents, which of course was not the case, but it really inspired me and gave me this confidence to try new things until I get a result. And so I went to do my PhD in immunology, and that was a very cool experience because science is just such a creative avenue. You have it's rapidly changing nowadays, like on a yearly basis, but we're learning so much more about how cells are communicating with each other. And I honestly think that even in my lifetime, the treatments will be so advanced, and I really want to contribute to this. So yeah, I love research because it's a very creative profession.
I see everyone on the panel nodding their head with a lot of what you're saying. It's so exciting. I want to move to the theme of International Women's Day this year, Choose to Challenge. As we all know, this past Monday was International Women's Day. I'll start with you, Fifi. How are you challenging the status quo in the work that you do and in your role as chief?
Right. Excellent question. Yes, I saw that tagline. Yes, to challenge. And obviously I'm a relatively senior leader at the hospital and at the university. But oftentimes when I look around the table, the virtual table or the real table, there aren't a lot of people who look like me. And so I think that that's a challenge that I'd like to, take on collectively with everyone here and around the world. As you mentioned at the very beginning of the introduction, Megan, diversity is what creates a really healthy organizations. I mean, that's already been shown at the corporate level, that when you have a corporate board that's very diverse, they're much more successful than boards which are much more homogeneous. And so the same applies, I think, at the hospital and the university level, and also at hospital and foundation board levels, I would say, whereby the leadership really needs to reflect the people we serve, the patients that we look after, which of course, particularly here in Toronto, is extremely diverse. And similarly, reflecting the people who work within our organizations. And so I think that, certainly, I think leaders from the BIPOC group, I think we really should be focusing on that. And that's something that certainly from my personal experience in terms of having had the privilege to hire around 15 radiation oncologists in my 8 years as a leader, we recruit from all around the world. Not Russia just yet, but we've got people from all around the world, from South America, from the Middle East, from Europe, and the US, and also of all racial, ethnic, and cultural background. And I'm also very proud to say that 40% of our recruits are women, and so our department is very, very diverse, and that's something that I'm really proud of. But I think that we need to continue to challenge the status quo.
Awesome. 40% in radiation oncology are women. That's phenomenal. Lesley, what does Choose to Challenge mean to you?
I think I echo many of the things that Fifi has said. I think it starts with our hiring practices. We, just like cancer is a very heterogeneous disease, and the people that we serve in Toronto especially are quite diverse. I think from my perspective, I tackle this question, and something that's very near and dear to me is looking at equity and patient engagement and also the patient experience. So a cornerstone of person-centered care is really understanding a patient as an individual. So how do we actually look at people as opposed to their disease? And how do we tailor the experience and understand their expectations of the system from whatever diverse lens or background they're coming from? I think too often, our leadership tables, our boards, etc., lack a level of diversity and then inherent bias in the development of our programs to help serve our patients. And for me, I think working with the Patient Experience Committee here, working with our senior leadership, is how do we transform that way of thinking? So really looking at people and instead of their disease, and tailoring our services from the minute of trying to find parking or dropping off a loved one at the roundabout to being able to contact the center in between visits, to linkages to their community providers. How do we do that in a way that is serving our diverse population, but looking at the patient experience from that individual perspective? I've spent a lot of time in my career trying to understand that from a data and a research perspective, but now being able to serve at Princess Margaret in an operations role, we have the ability to actually do something about that day to day. So how do we transform our ever-growing policies, procedures, and practices to something that actually matters and makes a difference to that individual person, not necessarily them as a patient of their disease, but as a person in the population that we serve. So I think for me, that's the most important. I try to bring that up in every single meeting. Are we thinking about this from the patient experience perspective as an individual? So understanding our people so that we can better serve them, so that they will have the best outcomes that they can have. You know, we do a lot in terms of treatment, but if we actually look at people first, we can make a significant difference in their ability to stay on treatment, for example. So for me, that's what matters most in this time, is really looking at this from an individual perspective.
That's awesome. That's really great. I think that connects really obviously very nicely into the work that Dr. Roden is doing in the patient experience program. We had Dr. Roden on our high tech series 2 episodes ago. So obviously that's a really important area of focus at the Cancer Center right now. So thank you for sharing that. My last question on this topic is to you, Anastasia. Working in the research space, how important is it to have representation and inclusion in research and across the field of STEM?
Yes, thank you. I think it's really critical. And to that end, when I was recruited to Princess Margaret, so I really liked Princess Margaret because it was my favorite interview of all the interviews, because I really felt like people were interested in my science, also in me as a person. And as Catherine O'Brien mentioned earlier, there was 3 women who were recruited by Princess Margaret last year. So I knew I was in a good company. And talking about these initiatives, one of the things that we really wanted to do is to put together a gender equity committee. So Dr. OBrien, Dr. Courtney Jones, and I are all co-chairing a Princess Margaret Gender Equity Committee, which is really focused on developing programs and initiatives that would help women in science to succeed within research, and also to create an infrastructure that would support women careers in STEM. Because what all of us see is that there's just the same amount of women trained in STEM as men, at least in biological scientists. It's about 50-50. So you have the same amount of PhDs, frequency of PhD students, the same, about equal proportions during postdoctoral training. But once for the next step, when it's time to lead your own group, there is really a huge dropout rate of women. And the reasons for it, I think, are very complex. And with our gender equity initiative, we want to address some of these factors and help women who are training to succeed and overcome this bottleneck.
That's great. That's a really tangible example of some really important work that's being done at Princess Margaret. And I think it connects really nicely to the next question, which I'm going to hand to you, Catherine, and the role that you're playing as a mentor. And in your recruitment of Anastasia and others, clearly you are playing a role as a mentor, empowering the next generation of women, whether it's mentorship or sponsorship. How are you doing this in your work in both research and surgery?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that when I trained in surgery at Western, there was actually no women on staff. One joined as I was finishing, but once you've lived in that environment where really there's all of the people that are your staff and that are your mentors are male, it's a different environment, and I learned, and it was great. But to have women and to be able to see, as Anastasia said, to be able to see somebody in that position means if you see it, you can be it. And to have that opportunity, I think, is so important. And I would have to say that the general surgery in particular, I can't speak about the other departments, but has done that very well. There's so many women in leadership, so many strong women. Our head of the division is Carol Swallow, who's a woman who runs a basic science lab and is a surgical oncologist. So I think there is a lot of mentoring and modeling that's available within the Toronto environment for general surgery, and it is so important. But I think that when you look at female general surgeons, I think encouraging them to actually consider academia and consider the possibility of running labs and having. And I'm currently mentoring one, Karina Kazazdi, and who has done a PhD and is interested in running a lab, and they're very few and far between the people that want to do this right now as surgeons. And I think mentoring women to want to be in that role is really important, to be able to encourage them and show them that it is possible, and it's possible to have a family and possible to do the surgery as well as the research, I think is key. And with respect to the PMH and the science, we needed more women in the stem cell group. We have world leaders, John Dick, we have Norman Isco, Gordon Keller, I mean, pillars in their fields of stem cell research. We didn't have as many women, and we didn't have, and in the process of recruiting, I know that Dr. Aaron Schimmer, who's a fantastic leader of the Institute, he was really, he was committed to getting the best candidates for the jobs, and the best candidates were women. And I think that's an important point to make. And I have been really enlightened by Anastasia, Courtney, and Kristen, because Anastasia and Courtney brought so many ideas about gender equity and about how to improve things and how to engage younger female scientists, that I really feel like they've upped my game, and I'm so proud that they're part of our group and they're part of the Institute, because they are the future, and they are the people that are going to make the changes that actually result in more equity in the department, in the scientific arena, and making sure that there isn't that drop off, or understanding why that drop off is from training to running your own lab. And as I said, I think we have such great future leaders in Anastasia and Courtney, really taking the helm at driving and understanding the metrics of what's happening, and then trying to change and having more women in science running their own labs. And I think that's so important. So I'm very proud to have played a little role in recruiting Anastasia, Courtney, and Chris. I think they're going to change the face moving forward, and they are the face of the Institute moving forward.
Well, you should be proud, and thank you for choosing to challenge. I think we're seeing that in the work that's being done, just phenomenal. On the nursing side, Annette, how are you using mentorship to train the next generation of nurses?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I think by the nature of the profession itself, majority of individuals go into the profession are women. And it's an interesting experience for me as a new leader who who went from a clinician to a leadership role. And I thought it would be important for me to highlight two individuals who were instrumental in mentoring me in very recent time. My predecessor in this role, Pamela Savage, and our previous VP, Marnie Escaf, whom I've had discussions about being a woman, being a leader, also a mom, and just what does that mean? And it's been an interesting learning experience in that in my interactions with my team and the advanced practice nurses at Princess Margaret report to my portfolio. So I've had those interactions where individuals come to me and ask me, actually in this day and age, some of them have expressed fear in sharing that they're planning to be pregnant. And one of my roles has been to redirect that to say, it's a break for 18 months to do service for all of our future. It's not a break for you, but it's a celebratory event. And you are doing an amazing, service to the world, but bringing on new life for our future. But your career is not going to be affected, but rather it's a different aspect of your life. And this was something that was shared to me by my mentors in terms of how they went through that internal sort of battle of wanting to pursue academia, wanting to pursue leadership, and then the actual fear of, what if I am away for 18 months? What if I'm not able to commit? How do I balance? In terms of the newer nurses, especially advanced practice nurses, we have formalized for our nurse practitioners where as part of their orientation, we are starting to align them with an experienced nurse practitioner within the oncology program so that along with the clinical experience, they have an opportunity to have that ongoing mentorship. And similarly, we at a provincial level as well, actually, we do have the opportunity where newer nurse practitioners from other smaller cancer centers come to our center to be mentored by some of the experienced nurse practitioners. So we have various ways of opening opportunities and formalized approach to mentorship. And certainly there's a lot of informal mentorship that happens here at UHN, which incredible women leaders we're all very fortunate to have here.
Absolutely. I think, as when you spoke about having staff members who will come to you and they're scared or nervous to say that I want to have a child and I want that to be an important part of my life. I think it's so important as female leaders and male leaders that we're changing that dialogue. That shouldn't be a scary conversation. It's an exciting conversation. I am with you. I firmly believe it's not about choosing. It's just about balancing. It's all good. Next area we're going to talk about is in the work that you're doing in your labs and in the clinics. We're so fortunate to have so many women across Princess Margaret who are contributing to important breakthroughs in the future of cancer research and care. So we'd like to hear about what you're each doing in some of these areas. So I'd love to start with you, Dr. OBrien. So your team's recent discovery regarding the strategy to slow down the growth of cancer cells, essentially pausing during chemotherapy in order to survive, is absolutely groundbreaking. Can you tell our viewers a bit about this discovery and how will this breakthrough help open doors for new discoveries down the road?
Yes, thank you very much, Megan. So we recently published a paper in Cell where we demonstrated that at times where cancer cells are responding to treatment, be it chemotherapy or targeted therapy, we know that when you stop the treatment, they'll often recur or they'll recur on treatment. And what we focused on was actually what's happening to these cells when they are responding. And we had some interesting and unexpected findings. We tracked each cell in the tumor and found that we weren't selecting for a resistant or a special clone. We were actually having regrowth of all the clones that we had initially injected, suggesting that these tumor cells were not competing, but they were actually cooperating and entering a state that was suppressing them and allowing them to enter a very slow cycle. So they stayed there alive, but really almost hibernating is probably the best comparison. And we were able to collaborate, just speaking to how fantastic the environment is in Toronto, with a specialist in embryology at the Mount Sinai Research Institute, the Lunenfeld. And what we showed was that actually these cancer cells have a very similar profile. Their state is very similar to embryos that are in diapause. And I didn't know what diapause was initially. And diapause it's conserved throughout the animal kingdom. And basically cells can enter, so an embryo in a deer or a mouse or a kangaroo, humans have lost the capacity, but if the environment is very caustic and unfavorable, the embryo can actually enter a state called diapause, where it just stops developing until the environment improves, and then the embryo continues to develop normally. And basically our cancer cells, in response to the caustic environment of chemotherapy, were actually recapitulating this embryonic diapause and staying in the state until the chemotherapy was lifted, and then they were able to grow again. And so this is a really interesting finding, because it does actually point to other possible targets for therapeutic targets. And so we have two interests. One is, how do you actually target cells specifically in this state? And that was part of the paper, was looking at different methods to target cancer cells and their sensitivities in this state. And quite clear that sensitivities of proliferating cancer cells and sensitivities of cancer cells in this diapause-like state are very different. So opening up therapeutic opportunities. And also, if we can target the state, then there's also the interest that we have is of looking at how do you induce cancer cells to enter this state in cancers where they're not already responding to treatment. And so we've had some really interesting work that's currently happening there to look at different methods to actually induce the state. And that's something that we're currently pursuing. And I think it's, we did this work in colorectal cancer, but at the same time that we published this in colorectal, there was also publications in Cancer Cell and Cancer Discovery showing that a very similar mechanism works in breast cancer, prostate cancer, and leukemias. So this is actually something that's more generalizable across cancers, and something that we're definitely pursuing quite aggressively in my lab to understand, one, how to disrupt the state, how to target cells in that state, and two, how to induce the state when you have cancer cells that are not responding to a chemotherapy or targeted agent.
It's amazing. I think what's so amazing about that is that you talked about all these partnerships and collaboration across Princess Margaret, U of T, UHN, the Lunenfeld, just this incredibly rich environment in which research is conducted with obviously scholars, researchers from all around the world, where it's really amazing. It's no surprise that's where breakthrough research can happen.
Yeah, I'd like to actually emphasize that. It's like, thank you for bringing it up. We had Miguel Romulo Santos at Mount Sinai, who's an embryology expert who was recruited here from UCSF. And we had Jason Moffat at the University of Toronto, a collaborator of many principal investigators at the Princess Margaret. And he has expertise in doing lentiviral barcoding libraries, and that was another key aspect. And then once we had all this data, we didn't know how to mathematically say with certainty that every cell had equal potential to enter the state. And there we actually worked very closely with a mathematician at the University of Toronto to model our data and to model all of our in vitro and in vivo data and to come up with a mathematical model. So I mean, I cannot emphasize how much being in Toronto made this paper possible, and being at the Princess Margaret made this research possible. The other two papers came from Harvard and from Columbia, and so I think it just speaks to how we have the environment, and we have such a great environment with so much expertise in our surrounding area and so much expertise within Princess Margaret itself, that it's really it's a flourishing environment.
Amazing, amazing. Next, I'm going to go over to you, Dr. Leslie Moody. Your research focuses on patient-reported outcomes. So how is technology influencing the trajectory of this work in patient-reported outcomes? What's next for research in this area?
Thank you. Yes, that was fascinating, Dr. OBrien, just wonderful. From a patient-reported outcomes perspective, the hard part 10 years ago was technology. No systems didn't talk to each other, and getting technology in the hands of patients to give real-time feedback was the challenge. Today, technology, anybody that knows me, I call it sort of technology fairy dust. Like, let's call Smart Cancer Care, or let's call digital and ask them to just fix this and make it work. And really today, a 12-year-old in their parents' basement can write you the script in an app for the things that were a challenge before. So I think with a lot of science these days, the challenge with technology moving forward is going to be the consumability of the information. So whether it be genetics, mathematical models, patient-reported outcomes, wearables, etc., from the amount of information and signals that you can get, we have to come up with a way to decode that and make it usable from a clinical perspective. And for us in patient-reported outcome world, that's really looking at what I call kind of unidimensional signals, like maybe you have a pain score of a 7 out of 10, but your pain plus the amount of fluid intake you have, plus where you are in your chemo cycles, plus your age, plus how many times you've used the ED in the last 6 months, plus could actually build a model that is much more predictive and could help us understand the trajectory of patients and how they're going to do on certain treatments with certain supports, etc. So for us, the next phase is really harnessing this information with enough of a model to move from sort of reactive analytics to much more predictive analytics through machine learning and then ultimately artificial intelligence to have these predictive models. We throw this term around quite a bit, artificial intelligence, but it actually takes quite, when you have such a heterogeneous disease and people are so individualistic in terms of their characteristics, it actually takes a lot of data to build these predictive models and to get us from machine learning to actual artificial intelligence. And so I think as our ability to partner with groups that have high computing power at U of T or here even internally, that's where this is going to take us. So the technology and entering those scores, entering that data is now the easy part. It's how do we transform that data into actual information to use in that patient's care. And so that's the exciting part for us, is building out those models and advancing the field in that way. So that's what excites me every day on that piece of research.
Oh, it's so fascinating and connects so nicely into all the patient experience work you're talking about and patients as partners and big data. Like it's pretty extraordinary. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So I'm going to take it over to you, Anastasia. Congratulations on receiving funding from the Gilead Sciences Research Scholars Program in Hematology and Oncology. For our viewers' benefit, the Gilead Research Scholars Program supports innovative research from emerging investigators from around the world to advance scientific knowledge in areas of unmet medical need to improve the lives of patients everywhere. So Anastasia, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your research and what do you see as the most promising cancer research area on the horizon?
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning it. So for the Gilead, so one of the projects that we proposed was actually a project that could probably only be done in Princess Margaret Cancer Center, because overall in scientific landscape, the basic scientists are frequently disconnected from clinical scientists. There's very few places in the world where basic researchers can have a very good access to patient samples, but also have physicians working together as collaborators at that level that you actually need to deconvolute some of these processes. And so my project was focused on understanding some of the immune microenvironment in the bone marrow of patients that have high-risk leukemias. So bone marrow is a very special place in everybody's body because this is the place where you have specific stem cells that give rise to billions of blood and also almost all the immune system cells in the body. So it's a production company, it's going on daily basis. But it's not like the cells are just suspended in space and they make all this progeny. No, they actually get a lot of support from supporting cells. And what my research program is focused on delineating how this interaction happens and also how these interactions are dysregulated in the context of aberrant human biases like leukemia, for example. What we want to figure out, who are really the friends of the malignant cells and how do we block it to basically target the disease. And I think in terms of science, I really see this change. You know, when I was, I always say that when I was a graduate student, if somebody did a microarray, which is a basic way of looking at some of the transcription, it was the highest of technology. Now we have single cell and we integrating machine learning into, you know, really interpreting a lot of these results. And I think that the science will move more towards understanding how tissues function. Because for a very long time, we didn't even know what is each cell within a person is. And then in the last couple of years, it was a huge effort to really deconvolute the cellular heterogeneity, even at the normal tissues. So I think understanding how tissues function in the context of cancer, in context of inflammation, is really kind of the future. Yeah. So a lot of collaborations.
Fascinating. And thank you for explaining that so well. It's interesting to hear how you talk about those cells and the influences of good cells and bad cells, like good friends and bad friends. That's awesome. I'm going to hand it over to Fifi. Can you explain how advancements in digital technology are helping both your clinical practice and your research?
Right. So following on Leslie's discussions was very eloquently articulating using the patient-reported outcomes and the biometrics. Within the radiation medicine program, we have just launched our strategic plan, which is revolutionizing radiation care through digital technology. And so our vision is that the entire cancer journey of our patients, even before they arrive on our doorsteps, that we will be able to use a combination of the patient-reported outcomes and the biometrics to try to help us to perhaps categorize high-risk or low-risk patients, and then therefore be able to help in guiding clinical management decisions. And then everything that we do within radiation medicine is already very, very we're completely computer dependent, so that the ability to be able to contour or define the patient's tumor volume, generating the radiation therapy plan to quality assuring the individual patient's plan, all that can be automated. And we are, in fact, already automating a lot of those steps in this process. And then even after we're finished with the treatment, we also want to be able to follow those patients. Again, similar to what Leslie had said, what are those key indicators that really will flag the patients who really need to come back into our hospital for follow-up versus the ones who can maybe not even require follow-up or definitely just virtual follow-up. And so along this entire journey, we are, first of all, specifically collaborating with private sector to develop those machine learning, because as Leslie said, you need volumes and volumes of data. And so we've got decades of radiation therapy scheduling data. So our current scheduling is being conducted by 4 individuals working through like 180 protocols. But what we want to be able to develop is a machine learned tool so that the next 50-year-old patient with early stage lung cancer, knowing the type of schedule that's been applicable in the last 10 years, we can then automate that individual schedule. We'll always have an individual who needs to provide that human oversight to make sure that the machine doesn't, is still doing the right thing. But that means that we could then redeploy those 3 individuals and coordinators onto other key activities within the program. And then finally, following upon again what Leslie had talked about, is that we also want to be able to individualize the patient needs, because we know that there are high needs patients who will require and benefit from that patient navigator, but then perhaps the lower needs patients would be able to benefit just from virtual assistance. And so we see that playing out in the coming several years. And, when we develop our strategic plan, we interviewed like more than 220 people locally, regionally, and around the world. And the message that we got very strongly is that the Princess Margaret is one of those unique institutions who can definitely actually execute what we just spelled out. So I'm really excited to look forward to that.
Very exciting. We're looking forward to that too. That's wonderful. The last one, I'm just going to hand it over to you, Annette. If you could just briefly tell us about your executive role with the Global Cancer Program. Where is this work heading, and how does it relate to cancer control in low to middle income countries?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think we have tremendous opportunity as part of the executive member of the Global Cancer Program to really contribute to cancer control by building capacity at a local level with the local teams, with our global partners. So especially within the profession of nursing, through sharing our educational resources, potentially mentorship, knowledge translation. We have tremendous resources available to us. How do we bring those resources to our global partners, especially those who do not have as much as we may do? And really partner with them and locally build capacity so that they can continue in their advancing of their profession and patient-centered care.
Amazing, amazing. It's a true testament to the real global reach, not only of our research, but also of the care that we do at Princess Margaret. Phenomenal. So I'm going to do one quick rapid fire question to each of you before we wrap up today. I'm going to ask each of you, what would be the advice you would give your 20-year-old self? So let's start with you, Dr. OBrien.
I would tell myself to worry less. It's very simple. I think it's a pretty common sentiment that as you get older, you realize that what's important and what's not, and what you should worry about, and what you can just let go and be like water off a duck's back. And I think that that's definitely what I would tell myself, not to worry so much.
I like how every single one of our panelists went like this when you said that. Fifi, how about you? What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Okay, you're going to laugh at this, Megan, but I would say that find the right partner for life, and preferably one who also has some assets. And so the reason I say that is my husband, who's been married now for a very long time, he's an engineer and he's very handy. And so he actually bought a real fixer-upper when after he graduated from engineering school, and he basically renovated that house all single-handedly, including the electricity and the plumbing, etc. And then we got married, and Fifi moved into his house, and then Fifi said, Richard, dear, I'd like to have a different house. And then, so of course, we're able to leverage his asset for another house. And so, but all joking aside, I mean, I think finding a really fantastic life partner is so important in order to help us go through our lives, and having that individual as your best friend, I think is really important, because in the end, we spend decades of our lives with this individual. And so that would be my advice, to choose your life partner very, very thoughtfully.
That's beautiful. I'm sure many of our viewers are wondering about the work-life balance with all of this. So that's a lovely sentiment. Anastasia, how about you?
Yeah, I think that my advice would be maybe socialize a little bit more, because if I think about my 20s, I just only think about being in the library, exams, really focused, as most international students and students are really focused on keeping these grades, like keeping your scholarships. And I think what, in addition to science, what really changed my life, and I went to graduate school, is having, having this network of women, but also some male allies who kind of carried me through. Like, I practiced for my interviews with them. I went to them when I had a problem or a question or something. And I think setting up this network and not just being focused just on, academics is very, very critical for success in life.
Great advice. How about you, Annette?
I would tell myself being a woman of color, being an immigrant is actually a strength, and there's a lot to contribute. So chin up and go get it, girl.
Awesome. And last but not least, Dr. Leslie Moody, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh, I would first advise that mute buttons are sticky in 2020. But no, 20-year-old self, I think travel as much as possible. I think I find some of the most intelligent people that think about problems in a very different manner are those that have traveled extensively or have had experiences abroad that have been forced to get out of their comfort zone and really understand a new culture or a new environment. I actually would hire somebody who's traveled over education in many respects. It just makes a very well-rounded person. So get out there and travel as much as possible to have a more open mind and diverse view of the world.
Well, what a powerful final comment when we're talking about and really exploring today how much diversity really is our strength. So thank you so much to our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us today. I'd like to invite everyone to join us for our fourth and final session of High Touch, High Tech on April 9th, where we will continue conversations as we explore leveraging computational power to fuel the future of cancer discovery and care with Dr. Benjamin Hyde-Keynes, Linda Penn, and Lillian Su. We will discuss the significance of big data as a backbone to discovery research, which came up several times in our conversation today, and clinical innovations that we see transforming the future of cancer care. You can register for the session via the link in the YouTube description below, and you can rewatch this or any of our other sessions on our YouTube channel. So thank you so much for your continued support of the Princess Margaret. We hope that you all remain safe and well, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.